tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
In a moment, we'll talk to lawyer extraordinaire Keith Wilson. But I just want to set the stage here, because the way the Liberals were talking about it yesterday, it's great news. They have great news to bring us, some freedom for the peasants. Let's take a look at Omar Algabra's comments yesterday.
This is thanks to the millions of Canadians who rolled up their sleeves and got vaccinated. That's why today's announcement is possible. And I'm pleased to announce that on June 20th, our government will suspend the requirement to be vaccinated in order to board a plane or train in Canada.
Okay, he was saying it was great news, and, we've earned it thanks to the vaccination rates. That sounds good. That sounds nice. What they've done is made it so that as of June 20th, you don't have to be vaccinated to board an airplane or a train in Canada. They've also suspended the vaccine mandate for workers in those sectors and for federal employees. So you could, if you're unvaccinated and you were laid off, theoretically go back to work. Now, here's the thing. It still is in place, this ArriveCan app. You still have to be vaccinated if you want to get out of things like quarantine and testing. If you want a friend to come visit you who's not vaccinated, they can't come into the country. It's that simple. The air travel mandate hasn't even been thrown completely into the scrap bin where it belongs. It's been suspended. It's been suspended. If you look at the government's messaging, they're saying that they have to be wary of potential new variants. So this could just be a temporary reprieve, a little temporary taste of liberty before the winter comes around and we get thrust right back into it. And obviously the airport situation right now, especially in Toronto, is driving this more than science, because you can't defend the indefensible. And one gentleman who knows this all too well is the lead lawyer for a very significant piece of litigation against the government on this that we have started with former Newfoundland Premier Brian Peckford, who is denied the right to travel the country by commercial air because he's not vaccinated. And in doing so, it's a large country. He got to Ottawa during the convoy, so you can get around it. But generally speaking, this is not conducive to living in a country that supposedly has mobility rights within it. Keith Wilson joins me on the line now. And I should just say, right before we get into it, Keith, in the background there, I have my upcoming book, The Freedom Convoy. I spoke to you for that, and you gave tremendous insights, as you always do. But it's good to have you on the show again.
I just ordered 3 copies. I was hoping you might sign them, but I don't think Amazon facilitates that. So
hey, well, we'll have to meet up in person. It would be my honor, and thank you very much for that, Keith. Let's start right out of the gate here. The mandate is, let's just say it's gone. Let's be charitable and say that the suspension will be permanent. Your lawsuit is continuing, correct?
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the fact that it's not gone. I appreciated your intro and that you've picked up on the sleight of hand here by the federal government. But so I can update you hot off the press here, so to speak. This morning, we were in an emergency application before the federal court brought by the federal government lawyers. They are requesting that the Peckford lawsuit, and it's not just former Premier Brian Peckford, it's also a number of 5 other applicants, Canadians, that we represent with my legal team through the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, as well as a couple of other lawsuits brought by from some very capable counsel, the Carl Harrison case, and we're all consolidated into one case before the court. So this morning, last night, we had a fight with the lawyers from Justice Canada saying, well, you guys should be happy and fold your tent. And we said, no, we're not folding our tent. Nowhere near. Even then, it was less clear than it is this morning as to what exactly the government's proposing. But the position we took yesterday was, even if all of the mandates are gone, to give your scenario life, Andrew, we're still bringing this to court because Canadians need to know whether their charter rights mean anything. This government has completely stomped on millions of Canadians' fundamental rights, not just with respect to mobility, the obvious ones, but having freedom to decide what the government can force you to put into your body, religious freedoms and other freedoms. So we made it clear, and I made it forcefully clear to the lead counsel for the Attorney General, that no matter what, this case must proceed. Canadians need to know one way or another whether the charter means anything and whether governments can do this, because as we all know, the number of times yesterday the minister said it's suspended, we won't hesitate to bring them back in September. As Dr. Tam said, the next wave is coming in September. It's like, yeah, you mean seasonality of flus? Yeah, I thought we knew about that. So that gives you some context. We're going to move ahead regardless. We're going to have a fight about it because they're going to bring an application to have our lawsuit struck out. This morning, they were trying to stop the cross-examinations that are ongoing that I'd like to talk about later in our interview. They wanted to stop those because they're occurring as we speak. And we were successful in getting the court to agree with us that in the meantime, we carry on and the government can bring its application at a later date to try and knock us out.
Yeah, I want to talk about that cross-examination in a moment. But the first thing I would share with people, when the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms was representing True North in our fight against the Leaders Debates Commission, after we were excluded from covering the debate in 2019, government had that action thrown out on the grounds of mootness. We got the injunction. We were allowed to cover the debate. We wanted to carry forward as well to get this on the record. And the government said, no, it's moot. The debate's done. And then what happened in 2021, the Debates Commission again banned not us, but Rebel News from covering, and they were right back to square one. So, I mean, that's just one example. And there are many more of why you can't just say, or you shouldn't just say, oh, well, the policy's done, you have no grievance, because that's a very convenient way for government to not have a judgment against them in court if they just keep putting these things forward, taking them back, putting them forward, taking them back.
Well, and to add some color to that, first of all, when is it that we are scheduled on this expedited process? And we are working flat out. Like we're in 6 weeks of back-to-back daily cross-examinations, most of which are highly technical experts or government officials with technical expertise. So we're working every day, 6 days a week, day and night, to move this thing forward and get it to the court as quickly as possible. Even with that accelerated timeline, when are we supposed to be in court? You know, the week of September 19th, I believe it is, off the top of my head. So when is the government talking about bringing back the mandates? September. So that's one sleight of hand. But the other is, you're right. They've already said mootness, meaning, for those who aren't legal geeks, mootness means there's no point in the court deciding because the issue's resolved, right? The mandate's gone. However, it is not uncommon in constitutional or charter matters to do a retrospective analysis. It happens all the time in a criminal setting. Something happened 6 months ago. Someone got pulled over. The police did X. They didn't warn. Was it a violation of someone's charter rights against unreasonable search and seizure? So it's not unusual for the court to not what's unusual is to have an ongoing reoccurring breach of charter rights affecting 6 million Canadians reoccurring every single day. That's what's unusual. So anyway, as you can tell, we're going to make an aggressive argument that this case has to be heard.
You know, I never like to get too conspiratorial, and it may be impossible to deduce motives from government, but do you think in some level they don't want the information that you're getting from this cross-examination process, which I'm assuming is supporting the idea that there is no scientific basis for this mandate? Do you think it's that they don't want that, and that's why the timing is happening right now? That's why they're ending the mandates now and then trying to get, or suspending the mandates and then trying to get this case dismissed?
Well, the legal team and I have talked about that, and all we can do is speculate. We don't think the cross-examinations have been going particularly well for the government witnesses. And we think it's a factor. What level of factor it is, because as we know, even his caucus has started to turn on him. The fact that, you know, one of the things that I've walked the government witnesses through, if I just might, because it's serious, but it's a little bit funny, and I do it with a completely straight face. And I say to, like, the epidemiologist or the person from Health Canada who approved the vaccines, both of whom I've cross-examined, and I put to them, I say, all right, Are you aware of any studies or medical evidence that suggests cell biology and physiology of humans who live in the United Kingdom, Europe, is different than the cell biology and physiology of Canadians in this geopolitical boundary called Canada? And they kind of look like, wow, this lawyer's not very sharp. And they go, no, human biology is human biology. And I go, oh, okay, thank you. And are you aware of the SARS-CoV-2 virus behaving differently in the geopolitical boundaries of the United Kingdom and Europe, for example, relative to the geopolitical boundaries of Canada? And then they look at me like I'm really stupid and say, no. And then I go, okay, are you aware from your life experience and your review of the literature with respect to disease transmission risk in air travel, whether there is something fundamentally different and unique about the aircraft that are used to transport people in Canada relative to the aircraft that are used to transport people in the UK and Europe? You see what I've just established?
Yes.
There's no reason for a different policy. Are you aware of any scientific information that you believe your colleagues in the international health communities in other countries are aware of? No. Okay. Well, I think we've just established this is political. So, and I don't get to say that last part. That's for the judge.
Now, I think that's brilliant, and I think it points to an issue that a lot of people have raised. Why is the science that we're supposed to be following so much different in Canada than anywhere else? Why are our doctors so much more enlightened than everywhere else, or are our doctors, quite frankly, not? And our politicians not? And people can draw their own conclusions from that. But I will say, when you bring up that question, that line of questioning, and we look at some of the other court rulings that have taken place, not at the Supreme Court, but on other things related to lockdowns and other restrictions. Courts, it seems like, have been very deferential to government. And even when they've said, yes, a breach has occurred, they've saved that under Section 1 by saying it's a reasonable limit. And I guess I would assume on this case, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it's ultimately going to come down to that Section 1 analysis, to whether it's a reasonable limit. But do you think that on this issue, that latitude and deference that we've seen is still going to be a factor?
I don't know. We're assuming it is. And that's why we've adopted a strategy that I'm going to be careful not to say out loud. And that's partly why I've not been doing media interviews lately, so I'm worried I'm going to reveal the strategy. We're very alive to that dynamic. And I believe we have a very powerful strategy to neutralize it lawfully. So it's a dynamic for sure. And remember, there are some key differences, of course. The early cases went when we were in the early phases of our whole COVID nightmare. And by the nightmare, I more mean the government response than the disease itself. So little was known. The data was all muddled up. Some guy's riding a motorcycle, pulls out to pass, and becomes a grill ornament of a cement truck. They bring him in, what's left of him. They test him. Oh, he's positive for COVID. Oh, there's another COVID death. Are you kidding me? He was on a motorcycle, had a head-on collision with a cement truck. Anyhow, so I could go on. We believed that this vaccine was going to be like a vaccine. In other words, stop you. You get the polio vaccine, you don't get polio. You get the pneumonia vaccine, you don't get pneumonia. You get the shingles vaccine, you don't get shingles.
Yeah, our triple vax prime minister just got COVID for the second time in 4 months.
Yeah, well, and what's alarming too, not to digress, but just as a footnote, one of the things that's really coming out is the people who are filling up the hospitals now, to the extent there is any filling occurring, because even that's an overstatement. But the group that is the largest group in hospital is the triple vaxxed. Those are the ones that seem to have the weakest immune systems, given the actual data and the opinion of the experts that we've presented.
So when we look at this mandate, and I think politically we could all see it for what it is. It's punitive, it's wedge politics. And I think it ultimately was prolonged after the convoy when Justin Trudeau wanted to get back at these truckers that embarrassed him. Your view is that this is not just one of the many policy options available to government. This is strictly unconstitutional. No government should have the right to do this, correct?
I don't think, yeah, I think it's a clear violation of fundamental charter rights. I think it's a clear example of government overreach on steroids. Yeah, that's our position. And we're, because there, as you point out to your listeners, that um, we're going to establish a charter breach. It's just a question of how many. I mean, mobility for sure. So then we're going to be into this section one fight. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means you're into the Oakes test, and that is the infringement of charter rights demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society? Was there a lesser measure available to the government? Is there a rational connection between the restrictions and the harm they're seeking to avoid? Well, the air travel one fails on that in spades. And then, is there proportionality? Is there proportionality between the impact of the violation of rights and the good that comes from it? And we're smoking them on that too. And the interesting thing is, it's really legally important. People may not pick up on this legal nuance, but so we have the onus to prove the charter breach. So we have to bring concrete evidence to show it. Once we establish it in real time, this is very rare in law, there's a onus shift. It flips immediately over to the government, where they have to present the evidence to prove they meet the Oakes test. So we're confident that we have sufficient evidence so far, and we still have cross-examination scheduled for every day. From now, they started in mid-May, and they go up to June 30th. And then we start our court brief and our factum writing process.
And as to whether there was a lesser means available, now I wouldn't support this because I think it's, again, incredibly intrusive. But even if the government, because when the government first introduced the vaccine mandate, they had a testing alternative that you could use for the first month to theoretically give people time to get vaccinated. And that was something that, again, would have been a useless bottleneck, was quite meaningless. There are lots of people that test positive and would have no idea they're sick because it's a false positive or because they're asymptomatic. But that would at least not close off air and rail travel to 6 million Canadians like this. So, I mean, that right there, to me, is a less intrusive means that the government, it didn't even seem like considered beyond that first month.
You're officially on the legal team as of right now.
No, we
yeah, we spotted that one too. Yeah, we've pursued that extensively. Okay, you put it to the witness. All right, a scenario, a doctor, you're vaccinated and you're sitting on an airplane, and you have a vaccinated person sitting beside you. Neither of you have been tested. It's possible you would agree with me, doctor, that person sitting beside you could be positive with COVID, correct? And they could transmit it to you even though they're vaccinated, correct? Yes, yes, yes. All right. Wouldn't you be safer if you're sitting on that airplane and an unvaccinated person was sitting beside you that was tested before getting on the airplane? You'd agree with me, doctor, that person's safer to you and has a greater likelihood of reducing the transmission of COVID, right? So.
And have they answered
Sorry,
that
I'm in this
question in the affirmative?
cross-examination mode. My apologies.
No, I'm curious
My
though
poor wife,
if you're getting the clear
I put
answers
it to you that the salt shaker is at the end of the table. I say my poor wife. Anyway.
So as we look at this then going forward, Keith, and I don't know how many people you get to subject to this cross-examination, and let me tell you, I do not envy them at all, but does it get to have you unearthed or have you approached that area of finding out who actually made this call? Because it often has seemed that it's not really the doctors that are making these calls, it's the politicians. And in some cases, the politicians say that they're just completely hands off on this. But is that within the scope of what you're able to uncover?
Oh yeah, we pursue that every day. And it's, I kind of, my wife and I have 4 kids, and I kind of feel every day like coming home and finding the cookie jar empty and saying to the kids, all right, who took all the cookies? And they all go, wasn't me. Right. So, what's become clear is they say either it wasn't them, or if it was them, so there's 16 government witnesses that the government has put forward, very senior government officials, properly credentialed in the right places, They say that they only make recommendation. The decision as to whether or not the mandate remains or is in place or is revoked is a political decision. It's made by cabinet. It's not made by them. And then the cabinet ministers were parading themselves before the microphones for the last several weeks saying, hey, it's not us, it's the experts. Well, the experts have testified under oath, it's not them. So it's obvious that this is just a political process, and they're engaged in a political decision-making process. And it's just become obvious to so many Canadians what's really going on here. We very much
look forward to the trial and the other things you're able to unearth there. And I know you won't let them off the hook easily, nor should you. And thanks again for chatting as we were working on this Freedom Convoy book. I think people will find you had a lot to offer, and we very much appreciate it. Thank you, Keith.
Looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.